Well, welcome back to First Baptist Church of Medford, New Jersey. This is the Lord's house, and we have the privilege of coming to God's house this evening. We don't have to; we get to. I feel that way. We don't have to go to church. We don't have to read our Bibles. We get to, and so I always look forward to having our time together. I did not know about Socrates having his hip replaced, because I was actually going to start my message this evening with a prayer request coming up in a couple weeks. Actually, our son, James, is going to be having hip surgery. He has a torn labrum in his left hip, and I'm not quite sure how or whatever, but he's going to have surgery in a couple weeks, and as part of his
put any weight on it for about, I think it's 4 or 5 weeks or something like that there. And it ties into our topic tonight, titled, Every Crutch Removed. Now, I didn't invent that title. I stole it from Chuck Swindoll's book. So, and a lot of that is based off of some of his materials and things like that, but it just was so appropriate in my heart and my life when I first started this message a while back and actually preached it years ago in the series of David. It just fits in. And I asked you a question on your introduction: ever been on crutches? How many people here have ever been on crutches? Wow. Well, I haven't. I'm just doing that by illustration. But I haven't been on crutches, but I've been tied up. But so and again, you know what they are, and I call them the wooden things. I understand they're not wood anymore, but they're those wooden things that you had, and they had the rubber or the foam on the arm, and they put it in, and they cushion your arm pads. They're the things that you lean on when you hurt your leg, have a broken leg, sprained ankle, or something like that, and you lean on them to get around. You lean on them and depend on them to help you heal. And I put in your notes there the Webster's definition of crutch. There's two actually different definitions. The first one is this: it's a support to be used by the disabled. And that's what we know as the wooden thing, or now titanium, or whatever they use nowadays. You put under your arm and you lean on it. The second definition is the one we're going to actually talk about this evening. Webster says another definition of crutch is anything that serves as a temporary and often inappropriate support, supplement, or substitute. Again, it's his second definition we're going to be looking at tonight's lesson, because every one of us leans on someone or something at some time during our lives. Every one of us do that. We all have a well-developed support system, and we depend on these people. We depend on these things to help us make it through each and every day. And in fact, if we really examine our hearts and our lives, we may find out that we just may be leaning on these things more than God. And as we continue in our biographical study of David, the life of David, it is my prayer that God would use David and the lessons that we learn from his life to minister to our hearts. And again, as I said, as I've studied this, David is probably he's one of my Mount Rushmore of people in the Bible, if not the number one, because he's so real. He is just like any one of us, and God uses him greatly. But I'm encouraged and reminded that his life is relevant for us. So we can look and we can learn from his life and his experiences. And even though there's centuries between us, there is a lot that we can learn from this man's life. And I'm also reminded that God does his greatest work when we run out of options. when we have no more strength on our own, when we have no more crutches to lean on, or as the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10, for when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul says, I take pleasure in my infirmities. I am content, he says, when all of these hardships come into my life, because when I am without my own strength, when I'm without my own crutches, then I find out just how powerful my God is. When I have nothing else to lean on but God. And to be honest with you, that's exactly where we ought to live every single day of our lives. But when we talk about leaning on the Lord, it can almost just sound like a cliche. But I really want us to think about this tonight. I don't know if there is a Christian here this evening who hasn't gone through a time in their life when God had to remove some of these things that we are leaning on to get our attention. Rick, you're leaning on this. Let me remove it from your life. And that's what we're going to look at today, because even every one of us has the propensity to not live a Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 kind of life. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own crutches. Solomon is telling us, don't lean on your crutches. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He'll hold you up. He will direct your paths. So I just thought, let me just wake you up a little bit. What are some of the crutches? Because nobody here has any crutches that we're leaning on. But some people that you know, what are some of the crutches that they lean on? Because obviously we wouldn't have that. We're just leaning on Jesus. Anyway, yeah, okay. Money. My resources, my money, my bank account, my 401k, because we're all resting in those things. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Any other crutches that you know of? Yes, Kathy? Automobiles. Well, yeah, I mean, it's nice to have an automobile, and we do rely on it. It's kind of like a phone. You know, again, I didn't have a cell phone until years ago when the bank finally paid for it, because I wasn't going to pay for it, to use it for business purposes. So the bank finally paid for it, and then I had one. But I must confess, I am now at the stage when I left the house the other day and went someplace without my phone, and I thought, oh my goodness, oh no. The car's going to break down. I'm going to be stuck out here. It's going to be midnight. It's going to be dark. Nobody's good. I can't call anybody. I mean, but seriously, no, but the car's the same way. Phone. What else? What are some things, Jack? Drugs and alcohol. Yeah. Listen, I don't feel good, so if I take this little tote or I take this little whatever, and it just kind of makes the hurt go away until I wake up. And then you go and you read the book of Proverbs when it says, who has woe, who has redness of the eyes, who has this, who's that? Oh, they tarry long at the wine. And you know, so yeah, obviously I'm against all that stuff there. But yeah, we can use that as a crutch. What else? Yes, Gene. Health. Our health. Well, yeah, because we all want good health. We all want to be strong until you don't have it. And whether COVID, whether it's a hip replacement, back surgery like I've had, you take it, hepatitis C, you get that phone call from the doctor saying we need to meet and bring your wife, and then all of a sudden that crutch of health is taken out. And then you have a wonderful opportunity to lean on Jesus. You're right. There are a lot of things that come into our lives that we can say, I can lean on this. This will help me to stand strong. I can lean on whether it's money or health or car or job or drugs or whatever. I can lean on this to get through the day. In Chuck Swindoll's biography about David, he talks about this topic of crutches, and he gives us 3 warnings. I put them in your notes there for all of us who prefer to use our own crutches. And as we prepare to look at every support that David had, and this is where it is, because God is going to remove every crutch that David was leaning on. He's going to take every support that David had in just a short period of time, because God is building his man. God is building a work in David. God is getting ready to try to help David to learn how to king it. So he's building his man. So Swindoll says they become substitutes for the Lord. A crutch can become a substitute for the Lord. And again, like any parent to a young child, God is patiently waiting for us to take his hand, but we can't normally do it because we're hanging on to something. We are holding on to a crutch because we can't let go. We're afraid to let go. And it's not uncommon for us to rather hold on to something tangible, something that I can see, something that I can go to my internet and I can find out my bank account and we go to something that I can see is tangible and I can lean on that instead of leaning on the promises of God. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 27 says, "The eternal God is thy refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms." Moses reminds the Israelites that it is God who is their refuge, their strength, and their true security. It's God who is going to take us through into the promised land. And folks, there is no better advice. There is no better advice than I can pass along to my children and to my grandchildren, that they can trust in the everlasting arms of God. There is no better advice that Pop-Up can give. And tell them often. And understand and tell them why, how God has carried me through these last 43 or 44 years of my life. Let them know, Pop-Up fell, Pop-Up there, but God was faithful. I'm not leaning on that any longer. I'm leaning on God. Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed." And just catch these verses. "For I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." God says, I'll hold you up. I will be your crutch. Lean on me. Trust in me. You won't, if you're leaning on something else, you won't be leaning on me. It becomes a substitute for me. And when you're substituting that, it's not me who's holding you up. And believe me, somebody can come by and just kick that crutch right out from under you. Nobody can kick God's arms out from under us. Nobody. But secondly, not only do they become substitutes for the Lord, they keep our focus horizontally. Because crutches can paralyze our walk of faith because I'm fixed on something that I can see and something that I can touch. And when this happens, we lose our vertical perspective. We stop thinking about God. Why do I need to think about God when I have it right here under my arm, holding me up? Here's a question. Kathy, you mentioned finances. How many people here remember the market crash of 2008? Okay. And we really don't have to go that far. We can just go back the past 2 months. Right? How many people here, I'm not going to say, how many people here saw their 401k go to a 201k or less? Right? I mean, the majority of people lost about 50% of their income for their retirement in that little bit of time. How'd that make you feel? What's that? Nauseous? My neighbor was nauseous. Well, yeah. I mean, you had people jumping out of first floor windows. I mean, it was that scary. But people lost a crutch because that's what they were leaning on. That's what I need because I'm retiring in 10 years. Yeah, it's funny, you know, and again, they're going through it again now. You know, and my son says, "Dad, this is incredible. Look at mine." I said, "You didn't lose anything. You haven't cashed anything in, have you?" He said, "No." I said, "We haven't lost a penny. You lost it on paper. But listen, this ain't going to be the first time you're going through this. You'll go through this 2 or 3 more times in your lifetime. So don't worry about it. God's still in charge." That we have to remind them. Yeah, I've been this a couple times. Yeah, we've done this, you know. But they keep our focus horizontally because I'm looking at this. If I'm looking at this, I don't need to look at God. But thirdly, they only offer temporary relief. If we are preferring to lean our own crutch, they only offer temporary relief. And that sounds like some advertisement for headache medicine, but it's not. So whatever our earthly crutches are, our job, our retirement, our 401k, our positions, our bank accounts, they can give us our sense of comfort for a short period of time. But again, all that has to happen is somebody pull the rug out of the market. And, oh, man, I don't know what we're going to do. That's why people were jumping out of buildings years ago, because they lost everything. They had no hope. So what we're going to focus on this evening is the removal of these crutches in David's life. And God takes away 5 things out of his life because God is preparing his man to be a king. And having risen from the lowly shepherd that he was, a lowly shepherd boy who now is one of Israel's top commanders in Israel's army, David had everything that he thought he would have needed as he continues to get ready to be the king. He had respect. He had fame. Remember, they're dancing in the streets talking about David. Saul's killed his 1,000, but David's killed 10,000s. He had fame. He had respect. He had position. He had friends. He had prestige. And he could have ridden that all the way. He could have ridden that wave of support all the way to him becoming the king. But God is going to strip him of some of these things because God wants David to lean on him and not on these other things. Let me just do a quick review in 1 Samuel chapter 18, and then we'll jump into 1 Samuel chapter 16 and look at these crutches. But I gave it to you in your notes here. This crisis reviewed in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 6 to 15, is now Saul is now torn between 2 worlds. He's actually a living civil war in his own body. Because now an evil spirit has come on upon him, and so he is torn between knowing David and what he did for him and his country, and he's evil and he hates David now, so he's torn. Look at chapter 18, verse 10. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house, and David played with his hand, as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David, even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. Think about that for a second. Chances are you've never had anybody threaten your life. Now, I've had people look at me with daggers in their eyes, but I've never had anybody chuck a spear at me. This is David and Saul. And David is doing everything that he can to lighten up Saul's troubled spirit. He's playing on his musical harp or whatever it is. He's playing music to soothe Saul's troubled spirit. And the next thing he knows, right next to his head, that spear stands right in the wall. Saul wanted to nail him to the wall with it. Suddenly, David, man, this guy's crazy. I got to get out. Chapter 18, verse 12, Saul was afraid of David because he knew that God was with David, and he also knew this, and this is a scary, scary thing. He also knew that God wasn't with him. That's frightening. And in verse 14, we looked at this again 2 weeks ago, but David behaved himself wisely. Everything that David did, he just behaved himself with grace, and he behaved himself wisely, and he prospered. And verse 15, Saul dreaded David. Wherefore, when Saul saw that he behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. It means he dreaded David. Man, how fast things have changed in this story. Now again, please remember, David has done absolutely nothing wrong. He has been the model of humility, dependability, and integrity, and he continuously does what is right, but everything is backfiring on him. He is still a young man. He's far away from home. And God now begins to mold David. And he's going to mold him by taking some of these crutches away. And I want us to look at 1 Samuel chapter 19, because I really want us to feel what David is going through. It's really important to put ourselves in his sandals and feel what David is going through. As the notes put it, the first crutch that God is going to take away from David is David's position. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 8. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines. Again, David's a leader. He's a commander in the Israelite army. So he's still doing Saul's bidding. He's still leading the army out there. And he takes them and he wins a great battle against the Philistines and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with his javelin. But he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin and the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. David's position as an officer in the Israelite army, he's an officer over many men, and he went out and he defeated the Philistines and things like that. And now, mark those words in your Bible, David fled and escaped. We're going to see that over and over and over again. Because David now has to run. And he has proved himself to be a hero. And all of that is gone with the flash of a spear. And he is no longer mentioned as part of Saul's army. God took that crutch away. He no longer has his position. Let me ask you a question. How many people here have experienced a layoff? A couple of us. How did you feel? Anybody wish to share? Scared? Yeah. Well, what's going to happen now? I mean, I need to make money. I need to pay my bills. I need to do this. I need to do that. I had insurance. I don't have insurance now. What about what? There's terror. You lose your position. So understand, David lost his position. Were you going to say something, John? No. You think, well, you're a failure. And so were the other 2,500 that got laid off the same day I did. So were all 2,500 failures? No. The bank failed. That's what happened. But you're right. So there's this anxiety comes apart. And again, for men, many times, my job is my identity. So I've lost my identity. I was in banking for 21 years until they called 2,500 people in one day into the office and said, oh, by the way, Rick, thank you, depart, be warmed and filled. They didn't even say that. But God was still in charge. And so we had confidence and things like that. But you're right, these things go through our minds. What do you think went through David's mind? This was what he did. He was a commander over men, and he was very successful. Again, we need to be very careful not to allow our positions to be a crutch that we lean on rather than leaning on God. God says, you can lean on me, Rick. Not to sound like a song. Rick, you can lean on me. So David is fled and escaped. But his position as an officer in the Israelite army is now over. It has been eliminated. So that's crutch number one. Crutch number two is David's wife. Look at chapter 19, verse 11. Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. There it is again. The king orders a hit on David. So he sends a squad to David's house, and they're going to watch him, and they're going to ambush David in the morning. And sensing the danger, David's wife, Michal, who is Saul's daughter, Michal says, hey, you better get out of town. And you won't have tomorrow. You got to get out tonight. And she helps him, and David fled and escaped again. Now we have a fugitive running away from the authority. But notice what happens afterwards. Look at verse 13. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, oh, he's sick. Well, she probably didn't say it that way, but he is sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may slay him. And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. And Saul said unto Michal, why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy, that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, he said unto me, let me go, why should I kill thee? This is an incredible story. Saul sends men, and so his wife puts a mannequin in the bed and puts some goat hair on it and everything, and he's not feeling well. Saul says, forget that, bring the whole bed to me, I want to kill him. And then they go and find it is this mannequin with goat hair on him, and he's, what is this? Why did you do this? And then she tells a kind of half-truth. Let me tell you something, a half-truth is still a whole lie. So just understand that. She lied. Oh, well, David threatened to kill me. He was going to kill me. She betrays her own husband. And she is no longer going to be David's wife. In fact, Saul's going to give her to somebody else. So God takes his wife away from him. Question number 3 is David's mentor. Look at chapter 19, verse 18. Here it is again. So David fled and escaped, and came to Samuel to Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. Here it again. David is still running. He's still fleeing and escaping. He's trying to find a place to lean. So he comes to Samuel, his mentor. David looks for Samuel for guidance, and he tells Samuel all that what's going on and how Saul's going to try to be killing him. And Samuel says, hey, David, let's go to Naioth. Okay, let's go to Naioth. Maybe they will be saved there. But now look at verse 19. And it was told Saul, saying, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. Saul finds out that David is in Naioth, and he sends men to David. He can't outrun Saul. He is still running and fleeing and escaping. And everywhere he goes, Saul's finding out where he's going. You seeing a pattern here? Gradually, David is losing every support that he has. He lost his position. He lost his wife. He lost his mentor. Look at chapter 20, verse 1. And David fled from Naioth and Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? What is mine iniquity, and what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life? That's crutch number 4. David is now going to lose his best friend. Because he says before Jonathan, that's what he says in chapter 20, verse 1, and came and said before Jonathan. Just listen to the emotion as David is breaking down now. I can only imagine David is saying there with great fear and tears in his heart. He says, what have I done? What is my iniquity? I did everything I could to be the best servant that I could. I did everything honestly and above board. I did everything. What is my sin before my father? He that seeketh, he's looking to kill me, Jonathan. What did I do wrong? In verse 2, look at what Jonathan says. And he said before him, God forbid, thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing, either great or small, but that he will show it me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It's not so. Jonathan says, no, David, that's not true. Trust me, my father would tell me. Not a chance. But look at verse 3. And David sware moreover and said, thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thine eyes. And he said, let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. Man, what a statement. This is from David, a man after God's own heart. There is only a small step between me and death. David has lost everything. He's lost his position. He's lost his wife. He's lost his mentor. And now he's losing his friend. And he had a hard time coping with his circumstances. Trust me, some people have a difficult time coping. They have a hard time coping. Ralph Barton was a wealthy cartoonist. He left this note on his pillow when he took his own life. He said, "I have had few difficulties, many friends, great success. I've gone from wife to wife. I have run from house to house, from country to country, and I am fed up with inventing devices to fill up 24 hours of my day." Man, that's a sad, sad commentary. What a tragic ending to a life. You know, he was only 39 years old. And he found out that all of his stuff, just like we're learning in Ecclesiastes on Wednesday nights, all of his stuff, all of the things that he thought would bring joy, meant absolutely nothing in the scheme of things. It brought him no joy. And David now is losing his closest friend. Turn over now to chapter 20, verse 42. Because this is their goodbye. And Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever.'" And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. Jonathan goes as far as he can to protect David, but now in the end, Jonathan must send him away. "You've got, David, you have to leave. I can't protect you any longer." And he and Jonathan go off in different directions. And God took away David's position. God took away David's wife. God took away David's mentor. God took away his friend. He took away everything. But the final blow that David finally loses is worse than them all. Because this fifth crutch, the last crutch, is what I call David's self-respect. David's self-respect. Look at chapter 21, verse 1. "Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business." There's another lie. "The king hath commanded me a business, and had said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place." Now over to verse 8. "And David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? For I've neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." Yeah, the king, he just told me right away, and I had to leave right away, so I didn't bring my weapons with me. I didn't bring my sword. Another, again, a lie. "And the priest said, The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there is no other save that here." And David said, "There is none like that. Give it to me." David comes to Nob, and he meets the priest Ahimelech. And through a series of events where David stretches the truth and he tells a lie, and finally in verse 10, here it is. Catch these words again. "And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul." Now listen to this. "And went to Achish, the king of Gath." Gath. Where's Gath? That's where Goliath was from. Goliath was from Gath. The guy that David killed, the hero of the Philistines, was from Gath. He is the champion of the Philistines. He came from Gath, and Gath was the headquarters of the Philistines. Guess where David is? David is now in enemy territory. He is in enemy territory, and everybody knows David in Gath. And here's David. He's looking for the king. He wants to talk to him. And do you think anybody in Gath noticed David walking around town? It's like they knew who he was. That would be David walking through the city of Gath, being unnoticed, would be like Pavarotti coming in here on a Sunday night, sitting back there and singing, and nobody recognizing. The powerful voice of Pavarotti. Oh, I hear something. What was that? No. No. David is walking around enemy territory looking for the king. Everybody notices David. Look at verse 11. Here it is. And the servants of Achish said unto him, is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000? Everybody knows who David is. And they're saying, he must be crazy to show up here. What is he doing here? Now look at verse 12. And David laid up these words in his heart and was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And here it is. And he changed his behavior before them and feigned himself mad in their hands and scrabbled on the doors of the gate and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. Hey, that's our man. That's our hero. That's our champion. Foaming at the mouth. David goes in and he feigns that he is crazy and he's allowing the spit to come down his beard. He's scratching at the gate. He's feigning, he's imitating being a wacko. He is crazy in front of these people. David now has literally fallen from the pinnacle of success to the depths of disgrace and despair. God has taken everything away from him. He took his position. He took his wife. He took his mentor. He took his friend. And now he took his self-respect. And if you think about it, how can this happen to a man after God's own heart? But it does. Well, folks, when every one of our crutches are removed, everything around us begins to erode and fall apart. And as that erosion continues, we begin to think differently. And you soon replace good thoughts with strange thoughts. And we begin to lose sight of the truth. And believe me, you're not far from rock bottom when this happens. And then finally, in the midst of all of this tragedy, there's a little comedy here. I want to add a little levity to this story, this drama. And it would be funny if it wasn't real. Look at verse 14. Then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, ye see the man is mad. Wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? And the king says, listen, you see he's crazy. I got enough nuts around here. I don't need another one. That's basically what he said in English. That's what he says. Do you think I need another crazy person here? I mean, it's comical, but it's sad. But that's our hero. That's David. That's the giant slayer. Look at how far he's fallen. Every crutch has been removed. And when we learn that the Lord is the only true one that we can lean on, that he is the only one that can support us, nobody's going to come and kick the arms out of God from behind us or under us. Because we keep wondering, why am I falling? Well, what are you leaning on? Believe me, life is hard enough even when we lean on the Lord. But there's no safer place to be. Let me give you a couple quick lessons in leaning for every one of us to learn. Number one, there is nothing wrong with leaning if you're leaning on the Lord. Again, we've got to lean on something or somebody. Life brings just too many things, too many life tragedies, trials, and heartaches and breaking experiences to go alone. But at the deepest level, we must be leaning on the Lord. Again, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own crutches. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Secondly, being stripped of all substitutes is one of the most painful experiences on earth. There is nothing more painful than God having to take something away from you. That's why Corrie ten Boom he said, listen, hold everything loosely so God doesn't have to pry our hands off of it. There's only one thing we need to hold on to and hold on to tight, and that is Jesus Christ. That is my relationship to him. There's a song we used to sing many, many years ago. It was called Treasures. I don't know if you ever remember it, but I'm not going to sing it to you, so you can relax. But here's the words. It says, one by one he took them from me, all the things I valued most. Until I was empty-handed, every glittering toy was lost. And I walked earth's highways, grieving in my rags and poverty, till I heard his voice inviting, lift your empty hands to me. Till I heard his voice inviting, lift your empty hands to me. So I held my hands toward heaven, and he filled them with a store of his own transcendent riches till they could contain no more. And at last I comprehended with my stupid mind and dull that God could not pour his riches in the hands already full. God cannot pour his riches in the hands already full. And my prayer is that God will give you and I grace when he starts to take those crutches out of our lives. Let's pray together. Father, again, Lord, I thank you again for a familiar story, but maybe a fresh new way to look at it. Lord, you gave us a wonderful example of David, a man after your own heart. But he's also just a man. He's fragile like each and every one of us. But Lord, you had to remove things from his life as you were preparing him to king it. You took away his position. You took away his wife, his mentor, his closest friend, and his self-respect, because you were building him up to be the man that you wanted him to be. Lord, would you help us voluntarily put the crutches aside and learn to lean on you and not our own understanding. I'll thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.